North Korea's secret missile launch. While the world reacts, North Korea secretly advances its goals. Generation after generation, step by step, they relentlessly build strength to finally control the game. To force America to see them as an equal president after president. Donald John Trump, reserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. This is the story of a small dictatorship, a Cold War relic that earned respect from the world's most powerful nation, its sworn enemy. He's a leader most people barely know. Many don't know much about him. I believe he'll be a pleasant surprise. But I've said this many times. Who can really say? You know how they say you can tell if you'll like someone within the first 5 seconds? Have you ever heard that? Well, I think I'll quickly know if something good will happen. After months of threats and insults, Donald Trump accepted Kim Jong-un's invitation. Their summit took place in Singapore. The meeting, intended to prevent war, lasted only a few hours. Today, we're at a historic meeting. We're signing a treaty to move past our difficult history and start a new chapter. Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. For almost 70 years, the Kim dynasty has prepared for this critical moment. Their nuclear program and military actions all served one goal. It's fantastic. To finally be treated as an equal by the United States. Kim Jong-un leads a small country and a small nation. Facing him is the leader of the United States, the president of the world's leading power. Under the gaze of the entire world, the most powerful man is challenging this minor dictator, engaging in a peculiar battle of words. This should be an easy win for Donald Trump, but it's not. I didn't fall down. As each generation of Kim's past and U.S.-North Korea relations evolved, I think North Koreans became more sure that nuclear weapons were their ultimate safeguard. They certainly became convinced of this after seeing what happened to Iraq and what happened to Libya. The critical mistake those two dictators made was not possessing nuclear weapons. The only thing the United States truly respects is a nuclear-armed nation. The United States has never attacked a country with nuclear weapons. On the 38th parallel, the demilitarized zone is tightly sealed. This remarkable border separates the two Koreas. The armies of North and South Korea have been in a standoff since 1953, when the Korean War ended. This confrontation appears permanent. But the quiet stalemate shifted when North Korea conducted its first nuclear test in 2006. Pyongyang has never hidden its progress in developing the bomb. The regime heavily publicizes every new explosion. In 2016, it proudly declared it was now on par with the major nuclear powers. With this nuclear test, we've definitively confirmed the structural and functional aspects, the power and capability of standardized, normalized nuclear warheads. They can now arm the strategic ballistic missile forces of the People's Army of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. These smaller nuclear warheads pack a greater punch. We can now produce as many as we desire and as many as we require. In my view, this fifth test undeniably proves their nuclear capability is not only credible but extremely dangerous. Naturally, the third and fourth tests were already concerning. We should also recall that in the 1990s, North Korea conducted numerous high-intensity tests in their research facilities. This was to miniaturize their warheads, enabling them to target locations further away. Along with advancements in its bomb program, North Korea also developed increasingly effective missiles. Since 2017, Their strike range has surpassed 10,000 kilometers. We begin with North Korea late today, launching a new missile. North Korea claims a successful nuclear missile test. North Korea has announced it successfully tested a nuclear-capable intercontinental ballistic missile. Kim Jong-un states this is a miniaturized nuclear warhead, a capability the world hoped North Korea would never achieve. North Korea's latest missile test is another intercontinental ballistic missile. It flew higher and longer than ever before. A triumphant North Korea asserts its latest ballistic missile test proves it can now strike anywhere in the United States. The world is in a state of shock, but North Korea's entry into the nuclear club isn't unexpected. It's the outcome of decades of effort, a program born even before the Korean People's Republic was founded. During World War II, many Koreans were forced into labor in Japan. So when the nuclear weapons detonated in Japan at the war's end, many Koreans had witnessed those weapons, seen their impact, and knew about them. They returned to Korea after the war and told Koreans about it, and the leadership recognized its immense significance. Following World War II, the victorious Allies divided Korea, mirroring the German model along the 38th parallel. In the north, the Soviets appointed the communist leader Kim Il-sung to head the Provisional People's Committee. 3 years later, he fully took control and established the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. In 1950, Kim Il-sung invaded South Korea. This marked the start of the Korean War, resulting in 3 million deaths over 3 years. The North was backed by China and the Soviet Union. The South received support from an international coalition, the first of its kind, under the UN supervision. The conflict was so severe that MacArthur, the American general commanding UN forces, considered using nuclear weapons. For the new Korean dictator, this was a turning point. If his small nation was to survive, it needed its own nuclear weapons. During the Korean War, Kim Il-sung approached the Russians and stated, "We need nuclear weapons. I really wanted to reach a point where I possessed nuclear weapons, allowing me to deter external threats." However, the Russians firmly stated, "Absolutely not." They were quite unwilling, and he persistently pursued the matter. Eventually, they granted permission for some North Korean scientists to study and become nuclear engineers. When North Korea embarked on its nuclear program, it was initially a strategy for the vulnerable. Nations lacking sufficient resources cannot maintain strength across all military domains. Consequently, they must focus all their efforts on one critical objective. For North Korea, this primary focus was the development of a nuclear arsenal. Following the Korean War, Kim Il-sung had hoped that Mao, who had recently lost a son in the conflict, would assist Korea in developing its nuclear weapons. He traveled to Beijing, but the relationship between the two leaders was strained. The Chinese leader did not trust his Korean counterpart. Sharing top-secret information about China's atomic bomb with him was completely out of the question. Therefore, in the early 1960s, Kim Il-sung once again turned to Moscow. The Soviet Union, aiming to curb Mao's influence, offered Pyongyang a friendship treaty that would solidify their alliance for many years. And the Soviet Union's initial contribution was a fully operational nuclear reactor. From the very beginning, Kim Il-sung intended for North Korea to become a nuclear power. This is why Korea obtained Russian technology, specifically IRT-2000 reactors. Kim Il-sung viewed this as strategic foresight. He understood that he would eventually need to confront the alliance between South Korea and the United States. And he recognized that conventional weapons would make this confrontation exceptionally difficult. Thus, he prioritized the development of a nuclear arsenal. During the 1970s, American reconnaissance planes captured the first images of the small 5-megawatt reactor that the Soviets had provided to North Korea. This facility, operational since 1965, was constructed in Yongbyon, located about 100 kilometers north of Pyongyang. North Korea's main nuclear program really ramped up around this time. However, it wasn't until the 1980s that the CIA began to express serious worries about the progress of these nuclear facilities. Up to that point, no one had fully grasped the genuine level of danger they actually posed. When I was part of the CIA's intelligence community, we considered North Korea to be our most challenging intelligence puzzle. I used to work on Soviet Union intelligence, and frankly, that felt like an open book compared to North Korea. So, you would collect small pieces of information and then try to put them all together. It was like trying to assemble a jigsaw puzzle with far too few pieces, and you still had to imagine what the final image on the box was supposed to look like. We observed the North Koreans constructing a small, what's known as a gas graphite moderated nuclear reactor, a 5-megawatt unit. It essentially functions as a research reactor. Even though it's a small reactor, its fuel produces approximately 5 kilograms of plutonium each year, which is enough material to create one nuclear weapon annually. By the early 1980s, North Korea possessed all the necessary components to develop nuclear weapons, and this seemed to be happening without much global attention. While quietly advancing its program, Pyongyang actually signed the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons in 1985. But by the late 1980s, the Berlin Wall had fallen, and with it, the entire Soviet bloc, which included North Korea, a unique symbol of communism. At that specific period, its economy appeared stronger than South Korea's, which was still in its very early stages. However, with the collapse of its communist allies worldwide, Kim Il-sung understood he had no other viable options. He knew he had to discover a way to guide his country out of its isolation. In 1992, they engaged with the United States, and the U.S. responded by stating, "You must adhere to your commitments to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, an agreement you made as a condition for joining the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which you accepted because the Soviets insisted on it before providing any nuclear assistance." This is truly where the main issue began. They joined the NPT and agreed to safeguards, and as part of accepting these safeguards, they eventually allowed inspections, which then revealed discrepancies in the information they had declared. In May of 1992, Hans Blix, the Director General of the IAEA, made a personal visit to Yongbyon. This marked the beginning of a rather unusual interaction between the North Koreans and the agency's inspectors. It involved 2 years of deception, 2 years filled with tension, threats, and manipulation. On certain days, Pyongyang would grant access to facilities they hadn't previously disclosed. On other days, they would threaten to expel the inspectors. Ultimately, Hans Blix had to concede that he had not been successful. He hadn't gained any concrete understanding of North Korea's nuclear program. Full inspection was denied at the radiochemical laboratory in accordance with the terms of our agreement. Consequently, we cannot dismiss the possibility that this radiochemical plant, which is a reprocessing facility, may have been operational between February of last year and the current year. We are not definitively stating it was, but we cannot rule out the possibility that it has been operational. Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect William Jefferson Clinton. Meanwhile, in early 1993, a new president was taking the oath of office in Washington. "I will preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. So help me God. So help me God." During the first few months of his presidency, Bill Clinton admitted that America hadn't truly anticipated this specific threat. "Before I took office, they may have already gathered enough nuclear material to construct 1 or 2 nuclear devices. This has been widely reported. I believe this demonstrates a lack of decisiveness on our part, because since we've been in office, I think we've pursued this course quite resolutely. Thank you very much." The new president's very first international visit brought him to the demilitarized zone that lies between North and South Korea. While traversing what's known as the Bridge of No Return, Bill Clinton felt confident enough to challenge the armed North Korean soldiers on the other side. The message he conveyed was absolutely clear. Bill Clinton vowed the complete destruction of North Korea if it persisted with its nuclear program. A quarter of a century later, Donald Trump would issue a very similar threat. However, the threats made back in 1994 carried far more weight than mere social media posts. We believed that was the crucial moment to halt them before they could produce 6 nuclear bombs. Therefore, as the Secretary of Defense at that time, I publicly declared that we would not permit North Korea to reprocess its fuel to create nuclear weapons. We were fully prepared to undertake some form of military action to prevent that from occurring. At that time, North Korea likely labeled me a warmonger. Despite the threat, North Korea continued to produce plutonium at its facility in Yongbyon and formally withdrew from the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons. This event took place on June 13, 1994. In Washington, war seemed to be only hours away. One of the actions we were examining at that point was the possibility of striking North Korea's reactor. We knew its exact location. We knew the locations of the facilities, and so that option was seriously considered. Other possibilities that were explored involved even more extensive military actions. At one point, the American ambassador in Seoul indicated that if you were going to consider these options, I would have to advise American citizens that it's time to start thinking about leaving. On June 16th, Secretary of Defense William Perry presented the attack plans to the president in the White House Situation Room. I informed him that there would be numerous casualties in South Korea, as well as among American troops. They had nearly 1 million men stationed on the border, and those million men were very close to Seoul. The Greater Seoul metropolitan area alone has a population of 20 million people. All of them are within approximately a 1 or 2 hour drive of the border. And so it would have resulted in a catastrophe. But I also assured them that we would ultimately defeat North Korea. It might take a few months to achieve that, but we would defeat them. With the South Korean Army and the American air and naval support, we possessed significantly superior forces. That was one aspect of what I communicated to them. I also told them that if they managed to acquire nuclear weapons, it would be substantially more dangerous. We should take every possible measure to dissuade North Korea from proceeding to develop nuclear weapons. On that same day, Jimmy Carter crossed the demilitarized zone, escorted by North Korean soldiers. The Clinton administration was determined to initiate war, but the former president, acting on his own initiative, was attempting one final chance at negotiation. In Pyongyang, he was received by Kim Il-sung, who was unwell but was being assisted by his son, Kim Jong-il. Literally, as the White House was holding meetings to discuss these potential actions and what to do, Jimmy Carter met with Kim Il-sung, and Kim Il-sung suggested that there was an opportunity for a conversation. A negotiation to be held concerning North Korea's future and its future relationship with the United States. And as they say in diplomacy, someone relented. And the rest, as they say, is history. It was a remarkable turn of events in history. Confrontation had been narrowly avoided. Just a few days later, North Korea was suddenly plunged into tragedy. Kim Il-sung had just passed away. The great leader was now declared the eternal president. Kim Jong-il, who had held the number 2 position in the regime for many years, now succeeded his father. Following the period of mourning, he resumed negotiations with Washington. These discussions took place in Geneva, with Robert Gallucci leading the American delegation. After 4 months of negotiations, an agreement was finally reached. To this very day, it remains the last agreement ever signed by the North Koreans. Pyongyang agreed to halt its military program, and in return, the Americans promised to provide North Korea with 2 light water reactors. These reactors could generate energy, but not weapons-grade plutonium. The primary objective of the 1994 negotiations was to stop North Korea's plutonium production nuclear weapons program. When we finalized the deal, that's precisely what we accomplished. They had 3 reactors, 1 operational, 2 under construction for plutonium production, and 1 reprocessing plant to extract the plutonium. We successfully shut all of them down. Every single one of them. The Central Intelligence Agency had projected that North Koreans would possess around 200 kilograms of plutonium annually if we hadn't made the deal. The Clinton administration continued these talks right up until the end of the president's term. Madeleine Albright, the Secretary of State, traveled to Pyongyang to prepare for a meeting between Clinton and Kim Jong-un, who was now the leader of the regime. Meanwhile, William Perry continued to negotiate the follow-up to the Geneva Agreements, a development that was anticipated to be historic. President Clinton agreed to the terms of the proposed agreement and expressed his readiness to meet with Kim Jong-un and sign the deal. But then, something rather unexpected occurred that month. It was called a U.S. election. A new administration took office. President Clinton was hesitant to sign an agreement that would constrain the incoming president's options. He said the new president should sign the agreement. Ladies and gentlemen, the president-elect of the United States, George Walker Bush. With this new president came a radical shift.
George Walker Bush, do solene fiar.
At the beginning of his presidency, he interrupted negotiations with North Korea. So help me God. Congratulations. From the very start, Bush quickly took control of the administration. So Perry's plans could no longer be implemented. They were totally abandoned by the new administration that was being put in place. For Bush, it was anything but Clinton. Perry's work became null and void. All the work achieved by the Clinton administration was wiped out. And here, in Korea, relations between the North and the South were also very unstable. In 2001, the international situation changed suddenly, and America radically redefined its foreign policy. North Korea is a regime arming with missiles and weapons of mass destruction while starving its citizens. States like these and their terrorist allies constitute an axis of evil, arming to threaten the peace of the world. This, we have been told since, was taken very badly in Pyongyang. And it was one of the reasons why they no longer had faith that the United States had any intent of normalizing relations, something that was for them an important reason for giving up their plutonium-based nuclear weapons program. Okay, how's that? That was the fatal flaw of the Bush administration. They didn't like the agreed framework. Okay, we're elected, that's fine. But have something ready to replace it with. Instead, they left this enormous vacuum, and the North Koreans just started up their program and never stopped it since then. So our last best chance, our last window, November 2000, and then it all disappeared. During the Bush years, North Korean propaganda violently raged against America. It was no longer afraid to threaten the United States, even in English. This is a statement from the government of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Ever since the Bush administration came into power, they've labeled us as part of an axis of evil. They declared it their official state policy to reject our system and targeted our nation for a preemptive nuclear strike. which is essentially a direct declaration of nuclear war aimed at our country. The regime poured all its resources into the Yongbyon facility, where thousands of scientists were living and working diligently. By then, North Korea was no longer hiding the fact that they were actively developing a bomb. A successful detonation was now inevitable. This plan reached its completion on October 9, 2006, marked by a proud announcement broadcast on the official state television channels. The DPRK felt it absolutely had to demonstrate it possessed nuclear weapons to safeguard its independence and its right to exist, especially facing the escalating daily threat of war from the initial test was quite modest in scale. However, it unequivocally proved that the Kim family's commitment to North Korea's nuclear program had never wavered. They had refused to back down, neither from President Bush's threats nor from President Clinton's offers. Back in 1994, North Korea possessed neither a functioning nuclear bomb nor any long-range ballistic missiles. The nation was extremely vulnerable. If a conflict had broken out then, North Korea would have faced total annihilation. It was for precisely this reason that the North Koreans gave assurances to the Americans that they would not pursue nuclear weapons. They desperately needed time to advance their program. Today, it's abundantly clear that North Korea consistently deceived the Americans and the entire international community. The world has been thoroughly misled by North Korea. Authoritarian and indeed totalitarian, political systems like North Korea enjoy two distinct advantages: the speed at which decisions can be made and the remarkable endurance of their long-term strategies. The fact that their strategies remain consistent is a significant advantage. In democratic nations like the United States or Japan, policies tend to shift dramatically depending on who is in power, even when the fundamental national goals remain the same. Yet, these governments, whether in the United States or Japan, are all fundamentally opposed to North Korea developing nuclear weapons. The Kim dynasty, by staying the course, witnessed a parade of American presidents come and go. Time consistently favors dictatorships. So help you God? So help me God. Congratulations, Mr. President. Then it was Barack Obama's turn to inhabit the White House. He made an effort to revive the diplomatic discussions that had begun during the Clinton administration. At the very start of the Obama administration, the president and his entire team, including myself, were actively seeking to convey messages to North Korea, signaling our genuine interest in pursuing or reestablishing a diplomatic path. So, you sent this message. What kind of response did you receive? The response came in the form of a missile test within the first few months of the Obama presidency. It was clearly an aggressive move. It was an act of defiance, and it also served as a probe. North Korea has a pattern of testing new leaders, whether in South Korea or in the United States, attempting to assert their independence by saying, "You're not in charge of me. We will defy your expectations. You cannot buy us off. You cannot intimidate us." American satellites and surveillance planes confirmed that North Korea was no longer genuinely fearful of Washington's authority. The Yongbyon complex had grown to an enormous size. Barack Obama was fully aware of this development, but he chose not to take direct action. He perceived no political benefit in confronting North Korea at that time. Consequently, his administration devised a new concept to rationalize their lack of assertive action. A policy they termed strategic patience. The North Koreans would often tell us, "Your policy is strategic patience." "That's fine," they'd say. "Be as patient as you wish. Meanwhile, we will continue to build our nuclear program." And that, unfortunately, is precisely what they did. Even though overt relations were strained, not all channels were completely closed. Within this building, Located near the United Nations headquarters in New York, Robert Carlin frequently engaged in meetings with North Korean diplomats throughout the Obama years. These discreet discussions, held behind these very windows, took place while North Korea was simultaneously undertaking every effort to capture America's attention. During Obama's 2 full terms in office, North Korea conducted 4 underground nuclear tests and launched 12 ballistic missiles. Robert Carlin, USDP. Each time, their message to the Americans was essentially, "Look, we are serious about this, and this is the capability we possess. Are you willing to sit down and negotiate? No? All right, then we will proceed to the next stage." They eventually revealed their uranium enrichment program to us. In November of 2010, Sig Hecker, Professor John Lewis, and myself, we were escorted to the Yongbyon facility. They led us into this particular building, which was something we hadn't really anticipated. We had imagined we might see a small number of centrifuges, perhaps 10, maybe 100, just modest quantities. And we would have thought, wow, that's truly impressive. Instead, they guided us into this large facility, led us to a viewing area, and there we saw 2,000 centrifuges. It left us utterly stunned. Our jaws literally dropped. We were momentarily speechless as we attempted to ascertain the exact number of centrifuges. And then they quickly escorted us away because their intention was not for us to see the entire operation, but rather for someone to ensure we understood that they had achieved this milestone and that the situation had consequently become significantly more complex and perilous. Kim Jong-il's ultimate ambition was to be recognized by an American president as an equal. Gaining recognition from the United States of America was the singular political aim of his entire government. This was never achieved. He passed away on December 17, 2011. His son, Kim Jong-un, then assumed leadership. This most recent generation of the Kim dynasty displays clear distinctions from his father and grandfather. Kim Jong-il had been preparing for many decades to take control of the nation's power. As the second highest-ranking official in the country, he possessed a deep understanding of international diplomacy and had secured considerable loyalty from the military. However, Kim Jong-un first surfaced as a young, unseasoned leader when his reign commenced. Numerous observers believed he would struggle to maintain his position. Nevertheless, he swiftly consolidated his power. He accomplished this by decisively eliminating anyone who presented even a minor threat, including those within his inner circle. He ordered the execution of his uncle, who was reportedly shot for alleged corruption. His half-brother was fatally poisoned at Kuala Lumpur International Airport by North Korea's intelligence agency. As the nation's leader, he promptly established 2 primary objectives. The first was to improve the country's overall economic standing. The second was to simultaneously advance its nuclear weapons program. His own brother was indeed poisoned at an airport in Kuala Lumpur, and this was carried out by North Korea's intelligence service. Now, in his role as the nation's leader, he very quickly set 2 main goals. The first was to enhance the country's overall economic condition, and the second was to advance the development of nuclear weapons at the same time. This entire situation had truly become an all-consuming focus. Our nuclear capabilities are crucial for protecting our nation's sovereignty. With this power, we will usher in an era of peace, prosperity, and strength, ultimately ensuring the welfare and happiness of our people. He appears to be fully in command of everything. It seems he has successfully intimidated everyone he needed to intimidate, and he has also managed to inspire everyone he needed to inspire. He gives the regime a sophisticated, modern image, particularly in how he presents himself publicly with his wife, and when he visits places like a perfume factory, for example. He is skillful at captivating the elite and maintaining their allegiance, even when facing significant challenges. I believe he has taken just enough action to guarantee that stability will continue. The young Kim Jong-un understood that nuclear tests alone wouldn't be sufficient to impress America. He also felt it was vital to demonstrate his capacity to strike his adversaries directly. Consequently, he began ballistic missile tests at an unprecedented rate. Often, he was seen personally overseeing these tests, as was shown on state television. We attempted an accommodating approach. We also tried a more confrontational strategy. We even experimented with simply ignoring North Korea entirely. We considered and threatened military intervention. Nearly every imaginable strategy was employed during that period, yet nothing proved effective. Whatever did work only provided a short-term resolution. Because the North Korean issue wasn't considered as pressing as, for instance, the war on terror in Afghanistan and Iraq, the problem did not receive the necessary resources and attention it warranted. The Obama administration felt there was ample time, believing North Korea could not possibly achieve the nuclear sophistication needed to directly threaten the United States within his presidential term. However, Kim Jong-un surprised the world. He elevated the nation's atomic scientists to the status of international heroes, who were greeted by enthusiastic crowds in Pyongyang. He arranged grand celebrations for them, featuring top North Korean performers. And despite the international sanctions, he allocated over 20% of the country's gross domestic product annually to the nuclear program. Thus, in the final days of Obama's presidency, Kim's strategy started to corner Trump. The unacceptable development was announced in January 2017 by Kim Jong-un, signaling his intention to develop an intercontinental ballistic missile capable of reaching the United States, and to arm that missile with a nuclear weapon so they could pose a threat to the United States, mirroring how they claimed the United States threatened them. The date of January 2017 was deliberately chosen. Please raise your right hand and repeat these words after me. Just a few days later, Washington welcomed a new president. I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. As for all the other presidents, Pyongyang made every effort within its capabilities to attract international attention and to reestablish itself as a significant global crisis. This time, Kim Jong-un had a substantial opportunity to achieve his objective. I recall in November of 2016, after the election, President Obama invited the President-elect Trump to the Oval Office for an extended and detailed discussion. He explained that he told Trump that North Korea was very likely to become the most pressing national security threat during his presidency. The new factor in this equation is Trump. I have encountered many American presidents throughout my career. Some of them were more accommodating, while others were less so. However, never before had there been a president who declared he would resolve the North Korean issue by completely destroying North Korea. Until this point, that was never considered a feasible course of action. Mr. Secretary General, Mr. President, world leaders, and distinguished delegates, welcome to New York. It's a profound honor to be here in my home city as a representative of the American people. Now, North Korea's reckless pursuit of nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles poses a threat to the entire global community. The United States possesses immense strength and patience, but if compelled to defend itself or its allies, we will have no alternative but to completely annihilate North Korea. Rocket Man is embarking on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime. September 2017. The General Assembly was utterly shocked by the new U.S. President's address. The reaction that followed was sharp and critical. The United States will never succeed in provoking a war against me or our nation. The entirety of America now lies within the range of our nuclear weapons. The nuclear button remains on my desk. This is not a threat. It's simply a statement of fact. I sincerely hope the United States keeps this information in mind. Even a limited military action against North Korea carries the potential to escalate into a full-scale nuclear exchange. That's the critical difference between our situation today and the one in 1994. We were more prepared to take decisive actions back in 1994 than we are at this moment. In essence, nuclear weapons effectively serve as a deterrent. They function as a deterrent for the United States. They also serve as a deterrent for North Korea. And this is precisely what the North Korean leadership understands. This is exactly why they developed their nuclear arsenal, to discourage the United States from initiating military action against them. In my assessment, there is currently no viable military option against North Korea. Despite the intense verbal exchanges he engaged in with Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump is likely aware that a nuclear conflict with North Korea is no longer feasible. Therefore, to compel his submission, he utilized the UN vote for the most severe economic sanctions ever imposed. The proposed resolution garnered 15 votes in favor. The draft resolution has now been unanimously adopted as Resolution 2397. This marked the 20th instance since 1993 that the Security Council resolved to implement more stringent sanctions against North Korea. These sanctions have been in effect for approximately 9 or 10 years, yet it's evident they have not succeeded. Some individuals still hold the belief that they will eventually prove effective. That's a form of self-deception, not a strategic plan. I seldom agree with President Putin, with one notable exception, when he stated that North Koreans would never relinquish their nuclear weapons, even if it meant subsisting solely on roots. That fundamental stance will never alter. It's simply impossible to compel North Korea into submission through economic sanctions. The sanctions have consistently been too superficial to genuinely impact North Korea, and these very sanctions are the genesis of Yangmadang, North Korea's black market. The state-controlled distribution system had collapsed, and when sanctions further crippled it, a parallel economy emerged, which Kim Jong-un permitted to flourish. Consequently, one of the unintended outcomes of the economic sanctions was that the North Korean economy actually experienced improvement. This parallel economy is supplied mainly from China. Dandong, a Chinese town on the border, has never really cut ties with Korea on the other side of the river. Despite the UN resolutions, Beijing has never taken any real measures to stop this trade. It remains an open secret, even if officially it applied international sanctions at the beginning of Kim Jong-un's reign. The North Korean dictator knows the importance of this Chinese influx. So before sitting down to negotiate with Donald Trump, he made a personal trip to meet with Xi Jinping, his counterpart in China. Kim Jong-un visited the Chinese president 3 times within just a few weeks, and he had never met him prior to these occasions. What came out of these meetings? Beijing once again gave the green light for Chinese tourists to visit North Korea, and air travel routes were reestablished. Commerce between the two nations resumed along their shared border. In essence, the sanctions were gradually losing their effectiveness. China wishes for North Korea to continue existing just as it is, even if it possesses nuclear weapons. What would you say is the most significant global conflict happening today? It's the ongoing dispute between China and the United States. They are in opposition on both diplomatic fronts and concerning security matters. As long as this major conflict shapes international relationships, China will maintain a strategic incentive to back North Korea, much like the United States has clear strategic interests in supporting South Korea. So, can you genuinely envision China imposing any serious economic pressure, or even risking the collapse of the North Korean government, simply to satisfy the United States? No, that's simply not possible. Kim Jong-un was not content with just getting closer to Beijing. Tensions with Seoul also began to rise to an unprecedented level in the history of the Korean peninsula. The North Korean leader met with South Korean President Moon Jae several times, and their initial summit marked a truly historic moment. This was Kim Jong-un's very first public appearance before the international media. From the absolute beginning, he did everything within his power to improve his public image, symbolically inviting the South Korean president to walk across the demarcation line separating the two countries. Within just a few hours, Kim Jong-un successfully managed to sway public opinion in South Korea, where he already held a favorable image. Seoul's television networks were completely captivated by him. North Korea's strategy. North Korea is proceeding with its announced plan. They state that their approach is to first develop a nuclear arsenal, and only then will they concentrate on economic advancement. This is precisely why Pyongyang has recently adopted a peaceful posture, showing openness to dialogue. Today, it is advantageous for them to engage in discussions at the negotiation table, which could allow them to shed the burdens of international sanctions. All they need to achieve this is to persuade China, Russia, and South Korea to ease the pressure from America. This strategy will buy them valuable time. The underlying intention behind this behavior is to give the impression that they are abandoning their nuclear weapons. Similar to past actions, they are carefully planning their next move. They are aware that President Moon in Seoul has only 3 years remaining in his term, and that President Trump in Washington will likely not be in office for much longer. Therefore, by skillfully managing the coming years, North Korea can establish itself as a nuclear power permanently. At the summit in Singapore, despite his outwardly cheerful demeanor, Kim Jong-un did not commit to any specific, concrete agreements. Mr. President, how is everything proceeding so far? Sir? It's going very well. What are your thoughts on this? It's been very, very good. We have an excellent relationship. Thank you. Thank you so much. So, despite the American president's optimism, this meeting is increasingly beginning to resemble a carefully laid trap. Mr. Kim, will you agree to relinquish your nuclear weapons, sir? That's acceptable. This is more than enough. I would argue that North Korea had its own distinct plan and agenda, and the United States attempted to derail it. They were compelled to respond, so in that regard, yes, we could characterize it as a trap. However, this situation is quite complex, involving numerous countries. Not all aspects are solely under Kim Jong-un's control. The trap is not exclusively theirs to set. On the other hand, it must be acknowledged that the United States underestimated North Korea for an extended period, and this obviously worsened the situation on the Korean peninsula. Situated on the border between the two Koreas lies a symbol of these many years of diplomatic indecision. It's a railway line that was constructed following the North-South Summit in the year 2000. This line is intended to connect Pyongyang with Seoul, yet a train has never actually been able to utilize it. Located at the edge of the demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas, this train track has transformed into a tourist attraction that South Koreans frequently visit. Thanks to the ongoing dialogue between the two nations, some hold the hope that they will eventually be able to purchase a ticket to travel to the north. This time, with the North-South Summit taking place, I genuinely feel that the situation is improving. Perhaps in the not-too-distant future, the two Koreas could be reunited. I truly wish for the opportunity to visit there. We share the same people, the same country. If there's even the slightest possibility for me to go, I will definitely take that train with all of my children. At the present moment, discussions are still in the initial phase of dialogue. We are holding out hope for a peaceful resolution. But in my personal view, this period of easing tensions cannot persist indefinitely. Washington will likely apply gentle pressure through diplomatic channels, but they will eventually grow weary of this. understanding that Korea has no intention of abandoning its nuclear arsenal. I anticipate that Trump will swiftly alter his approach. He will likely impose stricter sanctions and bring an end to any dialogue. Following that, tensions will escalate, potentially leading to targeted strikes on nuclear facilities. The most dire outcomes are always a possibility. Thank you.